How's it going, people? Welcome to United View, and it is the Manchester Derby week. So another big game, and what better way to look ahead to the game and try and delude ourselves that we've got any chance of winning than to get Charlie alongside me to discuss tactics and talk about how Manchester United might be able to beat Manchester City in this game. So, pleasure to have you on again, Charlie. Nice to see you. How are you doing?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, mate. All good. Hope you're well as well.
Yeah, not too bad. I think in terms of how I'm feeling ahead of this game, probably one of the Manchester derbies I've been least hyped for in the last sort of 4 or 5 years because in all honesty, I think it would take a hell of a lot of luck. It would take the approach going perfectly, and it would probably take some fluke events and refereeing decisions for United to actually get something out of this game.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Um, you need Haaland to have one of those very, very, very rare poor days, but it can happen. You know, we all went to we didn't go, but we were watching on the TV Anfield away to Liverpool a few weeks ago, and we were all predicting quite heavy defeats. But you know what? We got through it. We possibly even had one or two of the best chances in the game as well. So, you know, there is some hope there, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a really big thing that obviously will impact the players in terms of they've been there, done it before, away to a really big team, one of the title contenders in the Premier League this season. And they have managed to restrict them to not scoring, which is an impressive feat against Liverpool, especially at Anfield. Although it was a strangely flat atmosphere, which I don't know if the same thing will happen again at the Etihad. It's normally the one game of the season where, well, either the fans turn up or they stick the speakers on, either way. But I expect a little bit of a fired up City team. I think they usually tend to do well in the derby, and you've seen that obviously in the FA Cup final last season and also the game at the Etihad last year as well. So it'll be interesting to see how Ten Hag sets his team up. So in terms of what we're expecting with lineups then, so what we've got, I think the notable ones for City, probably John Stones potentially able to come back in. And also with Grealish out, Jeremy Doku back in as well. So talk to me a bit about the City team. What are you expecting to see from them and what are the key selections from their perspective?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the main one for me is John Stones possibly coming back in. Obviously, we don't fully know because of Pep's rotation. He's obviously come back from injury. Even when players aren't injured, Pep likes to rotate a lot. But I think John Stones is the key one because although Akanji has maybe surprised, he certainly surprised me from what I saw in the Bundesliga to what I'm seeing at City. Obviously, he's in a better environment, so it's maybe easier for him to perform. But he's impressed me quite a lot this season, Akanji. But John Stones is a different sort of level of player, particularly on the ball. And I think particularly when City do build up. And remember last season, the game at Old Trafford when we were trying to sort of restrict Rodri in build up, try and sort of restrict his influence and his control over the game. Pep Guardiola luckily had a man called John Stones. He could just slip in alongside him, and it sort of changed the whole sort of structure of the build-up and how we could deal with them. So I think John Stones coming back in is absolutely crucial for them. And I think generally they've just got so many good players. I mean, we can't really sit here talking all day about it, but I think one potential weakness that I've seen is maybe Carl Walker in recent weeks and months. I think whether it's the off the field issues or whether also maybe a physical decline himself. But I noticed when I watched the game against Chelsea, where they obviously Chelsea got a point at the Etihad, Carl Walker last few games he really seems to maybe his awareness, his concentration, just his general defensive state just hasn't been as strong in recent games. So I don't know whether you see that or whether you disagree, but that's something that we could maybe exploit in this game.
No, I agree with that, to be honest with you. I think for so many years, Walker's been such a reliable player in terms of if you want him to lock up pretty much any winger in the world 1v1, he can do it. Locked up Mbappe in the World Cup for England. And I think, yeah, both Gareth Southgate and Pep Guardiola trust him in big games. But of late, I think, as you say, off-field stuff could be impacting it. But he looks like an area that United can target. And it's interesting with City because I think the only it's difficult to look at that team and see too many weaknesses. So don't take this the wrong way. But I think if there is an area that can be targeted, it is probably the fullback areas. And it's interesting, obviously, the evolution and the journey Guardiola's been on with his fullbacks, because obviously we've had in different moments fullbacks inverting. In other moments, we've had sort of traditional fullbacks overlapping and getting balls in from the wider areas. I mean, Walker's done a little bit more of that this season than we've seen in the last few years. And you constantly get these changes with Guardiola where sometimes you end up with the wingers wide and the fullbacks inverting. Sometimes you have wingers narrow, fullbacks going around the outside to provide the width and get the crosses in. And I think in terms of the profiles of players in those areas, it's been quite interesting as well. So you've had obviously in previous seasons players like Cancelo and Zinchenko very technical, but now he's pretty much seeming to have four physical monsters who can also play really well with the ball as well. So I think on that left side, obviously Ake and Gvardiol there. In terms of the central defensive profiles, obviously Akanji there, but he can sometimes play on the right as well. And basically, it comes down to if you sign enough players that are incredible physically and incredible technically, how are you supposed to play against them? Because if they don't score against you in open play with their technical ability, at set pieces, they're all 6'5" and probably going to get on the end of the cross and stick it in the back of the net. So it's just another dimension of threat that City have. But of course, the game will always start 0-0, and there's always a small chance that United can actually go and win it. So, obviously, in terms of the way Chelsea played, there are some things that we can take from their approach into this game and potentially things we can look to implement ourselves. I think in recent Manchester derbies, also, United have used different strategies to try and cope with City's build up. And as you've mentioned, in terms of the way Guardiola can change things so quickly, we've had different approaches and he's been able to undo those quite quickly. But in terms of how Chelsea set up, what do you think are the key points in terms of how United can set up ourselves? And I see, interestingly, here you've gone with Camboila at right back, so maybe that's a point that you can dwell on a little bit there as well.
Yeah, 100%. Might be a little bit sort of unpopular with lots of people, but I just think for this game in particular, I think we've seen Dallo this season has been really, really good at individual duels. I mean, Dallo's been excellent this season. I think a lot of people haven't given him enough credit defensively. But I think on that other side, we need somebody who's not just physical but also quick. And I just feel having Amrabat or Lindelof as two of the options at fullback is really not going to be sort of a viable option. And you've also got, if you look at that back four as well, in terms of set pieces, you've got quite a lot of presence there with Casemiro as well. And that's going to be crucial, as you said, with the set piece threat that City sort of pose. But I just think, particularly up against Jeremy Doku, you need somebody who's going to get out to him quick, who's going to engage, who's going to match him in a sort of running race as well. And I think Camboila can do that from what I've seen of him. And that's not to say he's the answer. It's not to say he's an incredible world class talent. It's just for this particular game, I think he'd be quite a suitable pick. But as you said about the set pieces, I think that is a really, really difficult area. When I was watching the Chelsea game, a stat popped up on the screen. They've only conceded 2 goals at that time when they were playing Chelsea from set pieces all season in the league, which is 2 goals after about 20 odd games. It is just incredible. And I think the evolution of the teams you've been talking about is where we're sort of so far off, not just technically, but also if you look at the physical levels of our team as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. So are you almost suggesting then, in terms of our approach out of possession, we basically almost trust Camboila to lock up Doku and play the rest of the game as a 10v10 type thing?
With that slightly as well, but I think what Chelsea did well, they set up in they used a mid block for quite a lot of the game. So sometimes they engaged high, sometimes they were in a much lower block towards the end when they were trying to hold on, but they were in a sort of a mid block in between for a lot of the game. And they set up sort of a 4-4-2 or a 4-4-1-1 for most of the game. And it was Cole Palmer on that right hand side where Anthony is positioned right now on the graphic. He was sort of making that sort of 2v1 up against Doku with Malo Gusto for a lot of the game. And if you look on sort of City's other side, you're not going to expect Phil Foden to he's more likely to drift into midfield. So you can you don't maybe need to worry about him in wide areas as much. So I think Chelsea tried to sort of overcompensate on that left-hand side with Cole Palmer and Malo Gusto sort of 2v1 versus Doku. And of course, Doku's ability to he sometimes reminds me a little bit of Pedro Neto in terms of that stop, start, stop, start. So he sort of stops you and then he does that quick burst on the outside of the defender and somehow manages to get a cross in sort of to the byline. Obviously, that's going to happen. You're not going to be able to stop him every time. But if you can make it more awkward for him, if you can sort of stop his influence as much as possible, I think that's what we've got to do. And there was one instance where a cross came in and Haaland somehow managed to separate himself from 2 defenders and he missed an absolute sitter. And that's what we've got to hope for because Varane and Lindelof. Varane's one of the best box defenders still in the world, I think. but you are going to concede chances, but you've just got to try and reduce those chances coming to Haaland. And I think that's something you also wanted to touch on. Maybe how do you stop Haaland? Do you stop Haaland directly? Sort of do you man mark him? Do you have too many against him, or do you simply try and reduce as much as you can the service into Haaland? I think you wanted to talk on that a little bit.
Yes, yeah. So this is something that Ten Hag's spoken about, particularly last season. I think it's one of the questions that before each one of the Manchester derbies, the journalists were asking him, "How do you stop Erling Haaland?" And it's a really difficult task. But some of the weapons that Ten Hag's had available to him in previous seasons, mainly Luke Shaw, to be honest, isn't available in this particular game. Now, I think the thing that Shaw's got that most other defenders don't have is that he can almost match him for pace, but physically, Luke Shaw is a big guy. He has no problem pushing Haaland, giving him a bit back, and stopping him being able to get a free run to tap the ball in at the back post, for example. And I think without Luke Shaw, it does place more emphasis now on having to not only stop the service, but as you've said, knowing that in moments we're not going to be able to stop the service. He is going to get the odd chance, and we're just going to have to, I think, to an extent, hope that he misses. And I think the thing that summarises that is the XG of that game against Chelsea. I think as well as Chelsea played, and they managed to get a point, didn't they? They had, what was it, over 3 XG?
Yeah, so City had this is via Y Scout data. So City had about 3.5, and Chelsea had about 2.2. So they still conceded quite a lot of chances, Chelsea. But yeah,
Yeah, and this is the interesting thing as well, because I think this season in general, a lot's been made of United conceding a hell of a lot of shots, but in actual fact, the majority of those shots have actually been of a lower quality than the shots that most teams concede. So yes, United are far too open in transition a hell of a lot, and it's very frustrating to watch. And obviously, on the players, it takes a toll physically. But in terms of the actual chances we're conceding, the majority of these shots, there are a lot of defenders in the way. They're from bad angles. They're from fairly far outside the box. Now, against most teams, the balance sort of just about works okay in terms of there's no massive chances, and it means that United are probably going to win the game because we've got better individual quality. Against Manchester City, though, if you give Kevin De Bruyne a shot on the edge of the box, I can see it now in terms of a low-driven sort of daisy cutter type thing into the bottom left corner from sort of this inside right position, and Onana probably won't even dive because he will have a crowd of players in front of him, not see it, and it will just sail into the bottom corner. I can see that sort of thing happening, so that is a little bit of a worry, and it makes me even more concerned if United choose to go man for man again in midfield. So I know this is something you wanted to touch on as well. Now, it's something we see most of the time from Ten Hag's teams in terms of a man-for-man setup, but it could be really, really dangerous against City, couldn't it?
yeah. It's just the issue is with City. It's just they're just so good. They're just so good at creating overloads. Also physically, do I really do? Firstly, if we talk about Casemiro, do I really want Casemiro following whoever's? It could be Bernardo. It could be Bernardo or Alvarez, most likely. Do I trust Casemiro to be following that player sort of deeper, higher? Do I trust him to be able to cover that ground? Not really. Especially because if you look at that left hand side by Doku, what City do really, really well is they get those number eights just in behind. So if you look at sort of the space in between Cambuala and Lindelof, they get their number eights in those types of spaces. And Casemiro consistently doing that for however many minutes, I just don't think it's going to be best for him. I think you're probably better off trying to defend space. To be honest with you, just let the man go. It's just going to be too costly. And also, if you look at Kobbie Mainoo, for a player of that quality, you don't want Kobbie Mainoo to be too focused on following another man around. You want him to be more focused on when he gets the ball, what can he do with it? Because I feel, particularly if you're looking at people, sort of players down sort of in the history of football who have been really, really good at man marking other players, they're often not the most technically gifted players that you want on the ball. For example, Chelsea, when they played City, they had Conor Gallagher staying as tight to Rodri as possible. And Conor Gallagher's a decent player, don't get me wrong, but he's not the most incredibly technically gifted. He's in there to sort of disrupt Rodri. And obviously Caicedo and Enzo were more the two that can sort of play and play those forward passes. So I think we've got to be careful, because I think against City you can get in this mindset where, oh, where's my man? Where's my man? I've got to follow my man. And then when you get the ball, you haven't had the ball for that long, and you're so bothered about where your man is that it's all sort of, you just don't know really what to do with the ball. So I think that's another important element, not to be too focused on the man, just try and control the space, condense the space. The midfield for the bank of four there in midfield should be really, really narrow. Let City play it wide. As I said, Foden and Walker down that right hand side, particularly Walker. His attacking output isn't great from that side. Foden isn't really going to take you on the outside. He's probably going to come more narrow. So you should be able to manage the sort of the width okay there. The only real threat you've got in the box is probably Haaland, which is obviously he's incredible. But I think we can just sort of move from side to side, keep tight, and then when we do get the ball, I'm sure we'll talk about this in a minute and sort of how to beat City. Just try and play. I think the teams that have got results against City in recent times have actually been brave and gone at City. And there's a time and a place to do it, but I think we've got to be brave in this game.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. And I think, as you mentioned, in terms of covering space, so some of the key details in terms of that mid block will be, I think, actually, Kobbie Mainoo and Victor Lindelof in particular. The one thing you can say about both of those two, whilst they're not the most physically capable of players, psychologically they read the game really well and they're very, very composed. So I think their sort of leadership could be vital in terms of, you never know what you're going to get necessarily from City in terms of you can end up with different players popping up in different areas. De Bruyne in particular, if he spots a space, he'll go and exploit it. You need to be able to react to that in the moment, irrespective of what your game plan actually is. So I think having players that can slow the game down mentally and read what's going on and organise others is really important. I think Mainoo's got that skill set, as does Lindelof and potentially Rafael Varane as well. So I think that'll be really, really important. I think the other key detail here, though, is that it's vital for United that not only Bruno drops back in, but also Rashford has a really important job in the sense that if we lock City down to one side, either the left side or the right side, it is vital that we make sure they have to play all the way back and round to switch it so that we've got time to shift across. One of the things that really stood out for me in the Liverpool game when United went away to Anfield was that when United was shifting side to side and moving within that block, the movements were so unbelievably slow. It was a team that looked exhausted. You saw, the one that really stands out is I remember Højlund at one point just running about 15 yards sideways, but he was doing it genuinely. It was about jog or walking pace. It didn't look like a professional football sort of level of application, level of energy, which it's disappointing, but I think that's a reflection of where United actually are. And if United don't have the energy to match City's intensity for 90 minutes, every detail has to be right in terms of slowing City down to the greatest possible extent. So it's really important that Rashford works hard to be within range of Rodri so that these passes can't come in via Rodri, then out into midfield first, then out the other side. That could put us in a big spot of trouble. Or if possible, can he get across here and try and slow that switch down as much as possible? So if it is Rashford up the top end, he has got a really big job to try and delay City as much as possible and thereby make the guys behind him as effective as possible. It will also allow as well, if as and when City do play the ball backwards, really, really important that United take every opportunity to squeeze up the pitch. That has to be the trigger, and you have to assume that unless Kevin De Bruyne himself has dropped into this back line, City aren't going to play it back and then hit a long ball straight away. If De Bruyne's done that, fine. I can accept that. Still hold your line. But if it's anybody else on the receiving end of a backward pass, use the opportunity to get up the pitch. Even if it's 2-3 yards, use every possible opportunity to get out and stop ourselves being put under the cosh. Because if we do, as we've said, City will create a chance, and the closer in it is, in general, you'd probably expect Haaland to have a better chance of burying it. So I think that's going to be really important in terms of getting those details right in this game.
Yeah, 100%. I 100% agree with you. And listen, it's obviously going to be tough. I think the most important thing is we have to get through the first 10 or 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Just like we did at Anfield. I think I actually rewatched the game at Anfield a few days ago, and I remember that we conceded a corner after about 20, 30 seconds, and I was like, oh no, this is not going well. But we actually did really, really well. You could see, particularly Dalot, I think, when Dalot blocks something or stops a cross coming in, the passion from Dalot comes out, and we need those sort of reactions from players. I think Onana as well, to be fair, when he went to Liverpool, he did pretty well. And we've got quite a lot of personalities in that back line. Onana, Dalot, Varane as well. We just need to keep encouraging each other, keep making sure you're sticking to your sort of your plan. And I think that's something that Chelsea did really, really well. I mean, Disasi had an amazing game. Gusto played well. And you've just got to keep geeing each other's up, making sure everybody's sticking to the plan, making sure you're trying to frustrate the crowd as much as possible. And as you said, just I think you made a really, really good point about that switch. And I'm a little bit worried about that switch sort of in build up as well. When we don't use our fullbacks to back, if we do press at certain times, we don't use our fullbacks to back up the press, and City will manage to get the ball out to the fullbacks so easily. So I think what worries me most about this game is probably what Ten Hag's going to do, because I think what we're explaining here, this sort of approach, I haven't really got a problem with this, but I think half of me also thinks, is Ten Hag going to approach this game like any other game? We're just going to play like as Jamie Carragher did the analysis on Monday Night Football. We literally haven't got a midfield. The midfield's so vertically, like there's just nobody in there. It's so stretched, and I'm a little bit worried that Eric Ten Hag it goes maybe a little bit too brave, and I hope he's learnt the lessons of City and Liverpool last season. But look, we'll see what happens, I guess.
Yeah, I'm sure he has learnt the lessons, and it is a difficult situation because I think, as with any manager, if you set up with an approach where you're basically stopping the opposition first and foremost, and you don't win the game, you're always going to get criticised for a negative approach and it being anti-football or whatever. But the
Yeah.
reality is, every single one of the Manchester City 11 is better than the equivalent in red. And when that happens, and they've got a better bench, they're better conditioned physically, they're in the habit of winning games, they've played under the same manager for 5, 6 years. Reality is we're underdogs by a long way. So we're going to have to approach it like that. Now, in terms of how United can actually go and score ourselves, something you've mentioned actually is something that unusually Anthony could be quite effective with. So talk us through it.
Yeah, I just think again, having watched City a few times this season, you do get chances against City. You do get chances. I mean, Luton. I think Luton are a decent team, but they got. I know they conceded a lot, but they got two against City. Chelsea are not been playing well. They should really have had three or four goals at the Etihad. Edison was incredible, but what Chelsea I thought did really really well is they often sort of when they had a goal kick, they often sort of they tried to play through City, and they had I think it was Disasi and Colwill split quite wide, and then they had Chilwell quite wide on the left hand side, and they actually tried to play through City, sort of through into Enzo or Caicedo, and then when the ball got into Palmer. Or one of those midfield two, they looked for that quick ball in behind when the City sort of back line was pushed up really really high, and Jackson on that sort of obviously he was up front, but he was making that sort of run in between City's left centre back and left back in behind, and that's something that Rashford could maybe exploit. Also, maybe something Anthony could exploit, because I think we mentioned before we came on air. I don't rate Anthony as an incredible football player, but I actually think Anthony understands particularly what Ten Hag wants him to do. And his brain works quite quickly, Anthony. I think he's actually quite a smart player. And I think he will understand when to make those runs in behind, sort of Ake on that side, something that Palmer did as well. And also on the left-hand side, the goal that Chelsea scored actually came from that ball into the right-hand side in behind Ake. And then it came across to Raheem Sterling, and Walker. Actually, this is what we were talking about, the decline of Walker a bit. And it's obviously just one mistake, but we've seen quite a few from Walker. Sterling sort of Walker was sort of up against Sterling, and Sterling just sort of delayed, cut inside, and Walker completely misjudged it, and Sterling finished, and Chelsea went 1-0 up. And City just looked so open in that game, and I think Edison was absolutely key to sort of that sort of proactive nature, coming out, sort of claiming anything, trying to get into the attacker's feet as quickly as he could. But there's certainly that sort of initial playthrough and build up. Be brave. You've got to play. If it's just Onana playing long balls up to Rashford, we're not going to get anything, because Rashford won't win anything. Possibly early on in the game, if we're looking to sort of alleviate a bit of pressure, just get up the pitch. Possibly that ball towards, I was thinking Anthony on that right-hand side up against Ake, probably might be our better chance. Possibly on the left-hand side, if you push Dalot up really, really high on the halfway line, try and sort of go up against Walker, try and maybe win something there early on in the game, generate a bit of confidence. But generally, I think we're going to have to play through the first line in towards sort of the area where Kobe and Casemiro are. And to be fair, if there's anything that we've seen work sort of well this season from Casemiro. At times, he doesn't get it right too often, but that first time ball in behind, he tries it all the time. If he gets it right, we could get joy out of it. And I think that's something that Ten Hag will definitely look at for this game.
And I think it's strange because it's as frustrating as it can be at times to see that sort of basically just touch and hoof. It actually has an interesting impact on the defence, doesn't it? Because if the defence are trying to squeeze high and he keeps doing that, eventually they're going to drop off. And all of a sudden, Bruno's then got space, or Cobby's then got space, or the fullback's got space in between the lines there. So it could be a useful weapon, and it'll be interesting to see how United deal with it. If I had to press you now for your score prediction to finish off the show, what's your prediction?
Do you know what? I'm gonna be positive. I'm gonna be positive. I'm gonna go for a 1-1 draw. I'm gonna be positive. What about you?
I'm going to go 3-1 City, I think. I just can't see a way United win it.
Yeah.
Let us know yours down in the comments down below, and let us know what you thought of the show. It's nice to be back on United View, previewing a big game, and hopefully we'll be back on early next week with a review of how it's gone. See you all again very soon. Peace.